Hey everyone, I'm James Lynch, and this is Early Look, the show where I take a look at an upcoming notable fight. And on today's edition, I'm going to be previewing the UFC welterweight fight between Shavkat Rakhmonov and Geoff Neal, taking place January 14th on the UFC Fight Night card. But before I give you my preview and pick, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. It really does help out this channel a ton. And if you've never watched this show before, I'm going to go through a bunch of stats, a bunch of intangibles, and then I'll give you my preview and pick at the end. Okay, let's get into it. UFC Fight Night. It doesn't look like there's a location yet. I'm assuming Las Vegas, but we'll definitely have to see that. And you can see it's headlined by Kelvin Gastelum and Imavov. Probably going to do an early look preview on that one here soon, but this fight's even cooler. So we're going to be talking about Geoff Neal and Shavkat Rakhmonov today. Quick tail of the tape here. You see hands of steel, 15-4 record compared to 16-0 for Shavkat, 32 years old to 28, 5'11 to 6'1", 75-inch reach to 77. So you see there, Shavkat a little bit bigger, a little bit younger in this fight, and obviously undefeated in his career. Let's start first with, and this is only 3 rounds, got to mention that too. Let's start first with the hands of steel, Geoff Neal. Like I mentioned there, he is, let's see, 32 years old. I don't know, I'm stumbling over my words there. 32, he's 5'11 with a 75-inch reach. Doesn't have any advantages sort of physically in this fight, right? Because he's fighting a guy who's younger, taller, bigger. Neal is a BJJ purple belt. He trains at a Fortis MMA under Saif Saud, and he's gotten performance of the night 2 times against Nico Price and Vicente Luque. 9 knockouts, 2 submissions, and 4 decisions in his career, and he's the number 6th ranked welterweight. Neal is 7-2 in the UFC. He's got 5 stoppage victories. Neal made his amateur debut way back in October of 2010. He made his MMA debut, his pro debut, back in August of 2012, and didn't make his UFC debut until February 2018. Of course, he was a Contender Series winner. You see it there. He fought Chase Walden at middleweight. We'll talk about that in a sec. But yeah, Neal has been in the UFC for a couple of years now, which is pretty awesome. Like I mentioned, 7-2 in the octagon. He's got 5 stoppage victories, some notable wins. He's got a few. Bilal Muhammad, very notable win. That's a win that has aged quite well if you look at what Bilal's done in the weight class. Nico Price is sort of one of those guys that's been hovering around the rankings. I think that's a good win. Finished him there. Finished Mike Perry, which is good because, you know, Perry's not getting finished all the time. You got Ponzinibbio beating him there. Split decision. We'll talk about that in a sec. And then obviously Vicente Luque in his last fight really showed the old Geoff Neal, the Geoff Neal we've seen come into the UFC and really look like an absolutely new fighter than we saw the last couple fights prior to that against Ponzinibbio, Magny, and Thompson. We'll mention why that is in a second here. Some notable losses, like I mentioned, just Magny and Thompson, but there's one other loss I wanted to mention, which was his loss to Kevin Holland. That wasn't middleweight. That was back in January of 2017 at XKO 34. So yeah, I just had to mention that, obviously, with what Holland's been able to do in his career, and a pretty notable guy there. So one thing with Geoff Neal is, I mentioned he's fought in multiple weight classes. He's fought 14 times at welterweight. He's fought 3 times at middleweight, and he's had 2 catchweight fights. He's actually missed welterweight before, not in the UFC, but outside the UFC. He actually he actually came in at 172. So he only missed weight by a pound. You have to come in at 171, of course. Now, Neal has had a few layoffs in his UFC career. Part of that is due to an illness he had where he almost died. I don't know the medical term, but he had a really, and it wasn't COVID, it was something really severe, really serious, something life-threatening. Do a quick Google search, you can see what I mean there. But that caused Neal to miss he missed a lot of time, I should say, in his career. So if you look at the fight between Mike Perry and fighting Stephen Thompson, there was a 371-day layoff in between that fight. Then going from from Magny to Ponzinibbio, there was a 217-day layoff, and then going from Ponzinibbio to Luque, there's a 238-day layoff. If you watch Geoff Neal in those fights against Thompson, Magny, and I'd even say a bit with Ponzinibbio, he didn't look like the old Geoff Neal. He didn't look like the Geoff Neal that knocked out Mike Perry or beat Bilal Muhammad. He looked different. Is that because of the illness? It's tough to say. I know one thing that we can mention with the Stephen Thompson fight that he lost, which I think a lot of people, including myself, thought he was going to win, was that his corner wasn't there. His coach, Saif Saud, got COVID. He did not have him in his corner. So I'm sure that impacted him. I'm sure the layoff impacted him as well. I think if they were to rematch now, I think that fight could be a lot different. Same thing with Neal Magny. I think that's a fight too where Neal, I don't think, was 100% healthy, but just if you look at him in the Luque fight, he looked much better, much different. I know Luque's been on a bit of a decline, but I really thought that Neal looked like the old Geoff Neal in that fight. And finishing Luque in the 3rd round, extremely impressive. Really was impressed with that victory. Like I mentioned there, he's only had one fight that he's had to pull out of. That was the Neal Magny fight due to health reasons. But like I talked about there, a lot of significant time lost in the cage just because of the illness that he was dealing with. He's had one close fight, this split decision with Ponzinibbio. I went back and looked at the scorecards for that one. That was UFC 269 back in December of last year, 2021. 10 media members scored scored the fight for Neal, 4 media members scoring the fight for Ponzinibbio. So some people did feel like he did enough to, or didn't do enough to get the win there. And then obviously the majority did. So yeah, again, a bit of a closer fight. I remember watching that thinking, I don't know which way this is going to go, but Neal goes out there and gets the win. Okay, let's get to Shavkat Rakhmonov. Always love watching this guy fight. Dare I say, maybe the most underrated fighter in the division. You know, we all talk about Khamzat Chimaev and the run that he's been on, but Shavkat is a killer, man. 16-0. We'll talk about some of his performances here in a second here. So he's, like I said, undefeated, 28 years old, 8 submission wins, 0 decisions. This guy does not like getting paid by the hour. He is finishing all his opponents, which is incredible. If you think of 16 fights, he's never hit the judges' scorecards. He is 6'1" with a 77-inch reach, so he's 4 years younger, has a 2-inch height and 2-inch reach advantage in this fight. He is a master of sport in combat sambo. He's also a master of sport in MMA. He trains at a Kazakhstan top team and also out of Killcliff as well. I believe for this camp, I believe he's done it back home. I have not seen any. I don't know. I haven't checked his Instagram lately, but it doesn't seem like he's in the States right now. And the big thing with Shavkat is he's the former M1 welterweight champion. M1, one of the best promotions outside the UFC. There's a number of champions that have come from there that have made it to the UFC and found a lot of success. So Shavkat, again, has one of these weird things where if you look at it here, he technically made his amateur debut in September of 2014, but then made his pro debut in October. Some of these Kazakhstani, Russian fighters, well, I guess he's not from, where was he from? Not Kazakhstan. Yeah, he's Kazakhstan. He's born in Uzbekistan, fights out of Kazakhstan. A lot of these fighters that you see from these regions have these amateur fights and then these pro fights. A little bit confusing, but let's just say that he made his pro debut in 2014, September 2014. Made his MMA debut in 2014, his professional debut. At the time, Geoff Neal had already had 5 pro fights by the time that Shavkat had made his professional debut. He made his UFC debut in October of 2020. You can see there that was on the Khabib and Gaethje card. And at that point, Neal had also had 5 UFC fights at that point. So again, Neal's been in the UFC longer, but Shavkat, not fighting slouches. Look at these names that he's fighting over here in M1. 11-3, 28-6. These are good fighters that he's beating outside the UFC. So just wanted to point that out. Some notable, so he's 4-0 in the UFC. Like I mentioned, he's got 3 submissions and 1 knockout. 3 submissions, 1 knockout. That's correct. He has some notable wins. One that I wanted to mention that's not in the UFC, Jung Young Park had a win over him back in 2016. That's obviously someone that's a mainstay in the UFC now. And then he had his win over Oliveira, who's not in the UFC anymore. Prazeres, I think, is borderline UFC. And then the Neil Magny win. I mean, what a beatdown that was. That was a statement win. Look, Neil Magny, he's been finished before, for sure. Neil Magny has, one of these guys that seems like he's going to get close to a title and then he loses like a key fight. But Shavkat from bell to bell just dominated Neil Magny. We haven't really seen that. Like we've seen guys, finish him early, like, Damian Maia comes to mind or like an RDA, but like from bell to bell, Shavkat just beat him up. It was a dominant win for him. And I think the type of fight, kind of like with Khamzat Chimaev when he fought Li Jingliang, the type of fight where you're like, this guy's something special. So, I think that was really eye-opening because, again, nothing against Oliveira and Prazeres and these guys. I mean, they're not really mainstays in the UFC. Carlton Harris, decent fighter. But, again, Neil Magny to me was the fight that I think really woke people up. We know how good Shavkat is, but to do it against a good opponent like Neil, very, very, very impressive there. So, again, got to mention the Neil Magny victory. As far as layoffs, he had a pretty big layoff coming from M1 Challenge to the UFC. There was a 484-day layoff. So if you look at, from 2019 to 2020, he was off for a very long time. And a lot of that was COVID related. As you can see here, his opponents withdrawing. So actually he had one fight that he had to withdraw from. It was an undisclosed. He was supposed to fight Miev. That was back in July of 2020. So he's had a couple layoffs, the 484-day layoff, like I said, from 2019 to 2020. Going from Oliveira to Prazeres, there was a 245-day layoff. Going from Prazeres to Harris, there's a 224-day layoff. And then going from Neil Magny in this fight to Geoff Neal, there's a 203-day layoff. So a little bit concerning, but it's understandable. A lot of these fighters, I mean, it's tough to get fights regularly if you are living and training overseas. It can be a little bit difficult from that perspective. He's had a few injuries. Not injuries, I should say. He's had a couple fights canceled. So you can see here, this fight against Fambinski was canceled due to Corona. He had an undisclosed thing here against Amiv, and then Zaleski withdrew from the fight at 254, and that's where Alex Oliveira stepped up to the plate. The good thing with Shavkat Rakhmonov, he doesn't have any close fights because he keeps finishing his opponents, so we don't have to worry about any judges' scorecards or anything like that. Let's look at the odds right now. So you can see most books having Shavkat as almost a 4-1 favorite, almost 3-1 favorite. And as good as Geoff Neal looked in his last fight, I don't disagree with the odds here. I think Shavkat, and look, people will compare the fight to Neil Magny because the Magny fight with Geoff Neal was not that long ago. It was 2000. It was last May, and Shavkat just fought him this year, so not a huge discrepancy. However, I want to warn people that I think that Geoff Neal that fought Neil Magny is not the Geoff Neal we saw fight Luque. I'm expecting Neal to put up much better of a fight here. I still don't think he should be. I still think the odds are fine just because I do think Shavkat is that good. I think Shavkat is showing glimpses of being a future champion or a future contender at the very least. He does things in the cage, his movement, his height, his reach, everything that he does, he's good. And that's the thing. He's good everywhere. I mean, he submitted Neil Magny, but he's got good knockout power too. Look at the Carlton Harris fight. That's the thing that gets interesting. Now, the one thing with Geoff Neal that you can put to his credit, he's only got one knockout loss, and it was at middleweight against Kevin Holland in the 3rd round. So this is also a 3-round fight. It's possible Shavkat could go out there and get a late finish as well, but you got to look at the durability factor for Geoff Neal. Actually, he's been submitted as well back in the 3rd round, but you see these are later finishes. And if you look at his UFC career, he's never been finished in the UFC. Like I said, I want to preface this again by saying I think Geoff Neal will look better than people are expecting. I think Neal is a good fight for a lot of people in that weight class because I think he absolutely can bring it. Neal's got knockout power. He's got good wins, like I mentioned, Bilal Muhammad. There is, a bit of a question about his gas tank, but I think a lot of that had to do with the sickness. I don't think we'll see that. I mean, the gas tank wasn't an issue against Luque. He went out there and finished him in the 3rd round. To me, if you got a cardio issue, you're probably not finishing anyone in the 3rd round there. So as far as my pick for this fight, I think it's kind of obvious here. If you look at the odds and if you've been following me for a while, I'm a believer in Shavkat Rakhmonov. I think this is a great fight for him. I give Neal credit. There's a lot of fighters, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson being one of them, who did not want to fight Shavkat Rakhmonov. And I get it from Thompson's perspective too. He's on the tail end of his career, doesn't want to be fighting these up and comers and be on a highlight reel. But Geoff Neal, he really didn't have a choice. I mean, unfortunately, he got the win over Luque, but he had a couple losses, a few fights prior. So he doesn't have a ton of leverage here. So he almost is forced to fight a guy like Shavkat. But Shavkat's going to go out there, and I think he's going to finish Geoff Neal. I think he's going to be the first guy to finish Geoff Neal in the UFC. It'll either be, I don't know if it'll be knockout. I tend to think it might be more submission. I think what'll happen is Shavkat will catch him in the 2nd round, and I think he'll go in for a submission, and Neal will be forced to tap. I would love to see this fight go the distance. I would love Neal to prove me wrong. I'm a big fan of Geoff Neal. I think he's a great fighter. I think he's a tad underrated himself, but I just think with what Shavkat's been doing, there's a few guys you see in MMA right now that do special things. Khamzat Chimaev is one of them. Islam's one of them. I think for a certain period of time, Oliveira is one of them, considering the damage he could take and go out there and do that. There's a few guys that you just see something special in, and Shavkat, Yuri's one of them as well. Can't forget Yuri. Yuri is an anomaly. The guy, there's just no one like him. Shavkat's the same thing. I'm a big believer in him and what he can do and bring it to the table. So I'm going to go Shavkat by 2nd round submission. I think he knocks down Neal. I think the shots become too much, and he goes in there for submission, similar to what he did to Neil Magny, and I think he gets it done. Possibly 3rd round finish, but I think Shavkat inside the distance is probably your bet, rather than laying so much juice here on the 3 to 4 to 1 favorite here. But I think this is Shavkat's fight to lose, unless Neal brings it to another level. That's the only thing I could think happening here. Again, Neal's 32, so I think you're probably seeing the best Geoff Neal right now. I don't think there's any room for growth. Whereas I think with Arman being 28, Shavkat being 28, I think there is room for improvement. And I think we haven't seen the best version of him yet. So I'm going to stick with my pick of Shavkat by 2nd round or 3rd round finish to get it done over Geoff Neal. So I don't know what you guys think in the comment section below. Again, awesome fight, and full credit. I want to again emphasize this. Full credit for Geoff Neal for taking this fight. A lot of guys do not want to fight Shavkat Rakhmonov. He's a dangerous guy. Not a popular name in terms of the UFC, in terms of, like I mentioned, he's underrated. He's not a household name in the UFC, but he's an absolute killer. And we've seen that throughout his entire career. So I want to know what you guys think. Who are you picking? What do you think of my pick? Is there anything you guys want to discuss further about this fight? More than happy to do that in the comment section, as long as you guys are respectful. And if there's any other fights you want me to preview, again, I pretty much preview all the title fights, all the big name fights that are coming up. But if there's maybe one I'm missing and you want me to preview, more than happy to do that. That's what this channel is. It's basically your channel as far as I'm concerned when it comes to what you guys want to see on here. So I'm more than happy to do that as well. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel, youtube.com/Lynch on Sports. And while you're there, hit that like button and hit the subscribe button and that notification bell. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.